Are sanctions the way to end the Ukraine crisis? That's how they're being talked about in the media. According to them, sanctions isolate and punish corrupt leaders without hurting the general public and provide a peaceful alternative to war. But sanctions are a form of war that kill just as effectively as bombs or bullets. They've already left behind a body count of hundreds of thousands of people in Venezuela, Iran, and Iraq, just to name a few. Here's how it works. Sanctions are designed to cut a country off from the world financial system with trade restrictions and cutting access to credit. What follows is usually a massive decline in the value of the targeted currency, massive increases in the cost of living, and shortages of basic goods. So while sanctions are framed as targeting just the elites, the reality is that they work by devastating the general public. Now, why would a country want to cause this kind of suffering? The goal is to manufacture a social collapse, creating conditions that push people to overthrow their governments. Don't believe me? Take it from Rudy Giuliani explaining the motivation behind the Trump administration's sanctions on Iran.
The sanctions are working. The currency is going to nothing. We saw a sign of a man trying to sell his internal organs for $500 American, probably a fortune in Iran. These are the kinds of conditions that lead to successful revolution.
This is the same strategy behind US sanctions on Venezuela, which some reports have said killed over 100,000 Venezuelans through deprivation of food and medicine. This was the same strategy used against Iraq during the 90s.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died, and that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
Now we're hearing the same script with Russia. They say they're only targeting Russian banks and state institutions, but what they don't say is that by freezing their assets, restricting their access to credit and world trade, they've caused the value of the Russian currency, the ruble, to lose almost half of its value relative to the dollar in the last month. Companies have shut down, forcing people out of work. Bans on Russian oil have come into effect, the source of 40% of Russia's federal revenue, and sanctions continue to tighten by the day. There's already been a massive increase in the cost of living, which is only likely to worsen. And yes, this is completely intentional.
The ruble has already lost 30% of its value. The Russian economy is reeling.
A massive package of economic sanctions designed in time to hobble the Russian economy.
So while the sanctions against Russia are being treated as a peaceful alternative to war, these sanctions are really an escalation of war. The killing is quieter and the body count is less visible, but the death and destruction is no less real. The US says it wants peace as it sends more weapons to Ukraine and intensifies its economic war on Russia, but what we really need is a return to diplomacy and negotiation.